Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to a random review. Today's random review is The Intruder from 1962, directed by Roger Corman, starring William Shatner. This is also known as I Hate Your Guts, which is actually the title that comes up on this French Blu-ray when the film starts. Now this might be a bit of an outlier for Roger Corman, in the sense that this is between Premature Burial and Tales of Terror. He did 4 films in 1962, and this is also shot on location rather than a studio, because Corman wanted to get the authenticity of the South, the start of integration in schools. This is a pretty confrontational film. There is racial language in the film which might offend people, but for me, a film like Hidden Figures, which came out about the black women involved in the space race, I found that film more offensive because it didn't have racial language or that much threat. It was basically, oh, you can't come into the library and you have to go to a bathroom, half a mile away. Because I think that kind of depiction of the struggles of the civil rights movement and integration, that's a more dangerous film, I think, than something like The Intruder, which is more confrontational and more brutal, because you might actually have a generation of people who think, oh yeah, what were black people complaining about? It wasn't that bad. I mean, they just didn't get into libraries and they just had to go to different bathrooms. And it just kind of almost glosses over, no, people were murdered and people were lynched and things like that. So for me, the brutality and just the honesty of this Roger Corman film, which might offend some people, I think is necessary, and it's more truthful than some of the films we've had in the last 10, 15 years about those early 60s days of racial integration, especially in the South in the US. But let's talk about The Intruder, aka I Hate Your Guts. This stars William Shatner, who would be a little bit off of Star Trek in 1966. At this time he was a theatre actor, and Roger Corman got him for the part. On this French Blu-ray, like I said, there's a nice little 10-minute interview with Roger Corman and William Shatner, and William Shatner says he would have paid Corman to play this part. It is a wonderful part for an actor. So we just see the film opens with this very driving score, and we see from the windows of a bus the countryside, and then we slowly pan round to William Shatner wearing shades in a brilliant white suit, and he gets off in this little town, and we just assume he's like a salesman or whatever, but the music kind of hints that he might be something a little bit more dangerous. So he goes to the local hotel and introduces himself to the old lady behind the counter. And just like the old lady in Blazing Saddles, she has a fairly filthy mouth when it comes to racial epithets. And he says he's here about the integration problem and trying to stop integration because the following day 10 black kids are going to go into the white school for the first time, and he's here to try and stop it. He's basically here to rile people up under the guise of representing some coalition that's against integration. So he goes round the town canvassing people's opinion because the law has passed of integration. Corman does a really interesting thing. There's not a lot of the actors in the prime roles in the film, but the rest are actually played by the people of the town, who obviously were going through integration at the time or have recently went through integration. Corman says they were shooting some scenes and they pretty much had to shoot them very quickly and get out of the place because the town wasn't that happy with having them there. So it was Roger Corman's usual guerrilla type filmmaking. So for example, the role of the lead black kid, he was a local who had just been integrated into white, quote unquote, white schools fairly recently. So he had plenty of experience of the way people reacted and treated him. So there's a lot of honesty in the film, and there's a lot of truth in the film. I mean, it might not be truth that people want to see in 2022. Like I say, the film is brutal in places, and again doesn't shy away from racial language. Shatner goes to the man who lives in the mansion, who kind of runs the town, runs the paper, and gets him riled up, because he challenges them, the fact that they've just kind of laid down and let this law happen, and they really shouldn't have, and it's supposed to be a democracy, and it's supposed to be the will of the people, and nobody wanted integration in this town, or this area of the south. So it gets him riled up. He meets a couple who live in the room next door, a salesman and his wife, and kind of gets his way into their life, including the wife's life. He basically riles up the people in the town who aren't that bright, which leads to the inevitable violence, and him just standing back and letting human nature take its course. The only voice of dissension against Shatner in the town is one of the reporters on the local paper, and he eventually walks with the kids into the school, and afterwards he gets the shit kicked out of him by the local yahoos. I mean, really brutally. And there's a wonderful scene in the hospital with his daughter and wife when he actually realises the physical damage that's been done to him. Again, Corman doesn't shy away from the harm that's done to him, and it is pretty brutal. His daughter works in the local drugstore selling sweets to kids and things like that. And William Shatner introduces himself to her and says, and she says, "Oh, I'm still at school." And William Shatner's like, "Oh, I didn't think there was a college here." She said, "There's not." So she's a high school kid herself. And William Shatner very creepily says, "Oh, they grow up quickly around here." And eventually there's a scene where he's making out with her in a car in a lover's lane, which is might cause eyebrows in 2022 as well. In the car that the kind of guy who runs the town gave him a loan of. Shatner, it's his best performance. He's absolutely riveting and repulsive at the same time. There is an evangelical fervour to his performance. He gives a wonderful, well, not a wonderful speech, but wonderful as in, for an actor, a wonderful speech on like the town's courthouse steps in front of a couple of hundred people, and again just whipping them into a frenzy, which obviously works. But again, the gleam in Shatner's eyes, this is a perfect example of a young actor, a hungry actor, wanting to lay down a claim to anybody who's watching the film, who produced these films, that I'm an actor you want in your films. For example, if Shatner had made this later in his career, say like 1967, and he'd been in Star Trek for a few years, and then made this, it would be a completely different performance. Whereas this is just absolutely raw and energetic and evangelical, and it's just a blistering performance, and it's easily the best thing Shatner's ever done. And again, if you're used to Corman being, making slightly campier, kitschy films, or if you're used to Shatner being William Shatner, this is completely different. This is a young, energetic, nasty Shatner. The scene where he's alone with the salesman's wife, he is decidedly dangerous. At one point he asks her, "You're not scared of me, are you?" Which is, line delivery is just absolutely fantastic. It's just a wonderful, honest, brutal little film, which I think, if you haven't seen it, you really need to see it. Again, despite its harsh, brutal context, or content. But like I say, I think it's a much more important film to watch, rather than some of these later, films made like 50 years or 60 years after the civil rights struggle, that maybe kind of gloss over a few things. There is a burning cross that Shatner helps raise. There's again, like I say, if you're used to William Shatner being William Shatner, the scene or the shots of William Shatner riding in a car with 3 members of the Ku Klux Klan will probably make you double take a bit. This doesn't gloss over anything about the civil rights struggle or the struggle of integration. This does not gloss over anything, and I think that makes it more honest and worthwhile than watching some films that have been made in the 21st century about that subject. So thanks very much for watching this random review of The Intruder, or I Hate Your Guts. Let me know if you've seen it and what you think of it.
Or what do you think is William Shatner's career-defining performance? And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films saying farewell.